My name is Miriam Calhoun. And the moment my daughter handed me the court document claiming I was mentally unfit to care for myself, I felt something inside me go still, not break, not burn, just still, like the way the world quiets before a storm, like the moment before the verdict drops. You raise a child, you carry her through sickness, heartbreak, self-doubt. You give her every ounce of yourself. And still one day she might look you in the eye and decide you're nothing but an obstacle to be removed. That's what my daughter Rachel decided. I was 74 when she filed the petition. Retired. Alone but not lonely. My days were filled with gardening, a weekly book club, long walks to the farmer's market, and the occasional crossword puzzle I didn't cheat on. But Rachel saw something else. She saw assets. She saw the house I'd paid off, the savings account I'd been building since before she was born, the land her father and I bought when we were young and full of possibility. And somewhere along the way, she must have thought, why wait? It didn't start with papers. It started small. Rachel stopped bringing the grandkids by. She told them I was too tired or getting forgetful. She began showing up unannounced, often letting herself in with the spare key I'd forgotten she had. One morning, I found her sitting in my living room sorting through my mail. "Oh, Mom," she said with a too sweet smile. "You left all this scattered on the floor. You really should let me help manage these things." Scattered. I had organized the bills by due date, clipped, color-coded, and placed in a basket by the door. I'd done that every month since 1982. But I said nothing. I nodded and went to make us tea. That's how it works in the beginning. Not with confrontation, with erosion. She started taking over little things. Canceling appointments. Redirecting my pharmacy account. One afternoon I realized she'd closed my online banking access for security reasons. She'd moved my checkbook. Changed the Wi-Fi password. Still, I told myself, she's worried. She means well. It wasn't until the doctor's appointment that I realized the truth. I'd scheduled a routine checkup, blood pressure, cholesterol. Nothing serious. Rachel insisted on coming. "Just in case you forget to mention something," she said. She sat with a clipboard in her lap writing notes. At one point, when I mentioned occasional dizziness after gardening, she cut me off and told the doctor, "Mom's memory isn't what it used to be. Sometimes she forgets to eat altogether." I whipped my head toward her. "That's not true," I said, sharper than I intended. She smiled at me, sweet, calm, patient. The kind of smile nurses give to confused patients. And in that instant, I knew. This wasn't about care, it was about control. 2 weeks later, the document arrived. A petition for guardianship filed in the county court. She wanted me declared legally incapacitated, citing erratic behavior, forgetfulness, and increasing signs of paranoia. She included a notarized statement from a doctor I hadn't seen in over a year. I remember sitting in my kitchen, my trembling hands holding that thick envelope, reading each word like it was a betrayal inked in fire. My daughter wanted the court to strip me of my independence, to have herself appointed as guardian with full control of my estate. It should have shattered me, but instead, I became cold, precise. I was a legal secretary for 41 years. I may not have had a JD after my name, but I knew enough about the law to recognize how real this threat was. I also knew one other thing. There are always two sides to a petition, and mine would be the one the court never saw coming. So I stood, poured myself a fresh cup of tea, and opened the drawer where I kept my old case files and contacts. People forget what retired women know. They forget how many friends we've made, how many favors we've earned, and how long we've waited for our voice to matter again. Rachel thought she was dealing with a soft-hearted old woman. She was about to meet Miriam Calhoun, the woman who once built cases in silence and let justice speak in thunder. The first person I called was Arthur. Judge Arthur Bellamy, now retired, living 2 towns over in a white clapboard house with hydrangeas out front and a rescue beagle named Jazz. I hadn't seen him in nearly a decade, but I knew he would remember me. I proved his legal briefs for 20 years and never once let a typo escape. He used to say I had sharper eyes than any court clerk he'd ever met. He picked up on the second ring. "Miriam Calhoun," he said before I could even introduce myself. "I had a dream about you last week." "Well, I hope it wasn't one of the boring ones," I smiled. "You were sitting in a courtroom. and everyone else was silent. But you were holding a fire. He always spoke in riddles, but I loved that about him. I might need that fire now, Arthur, I said. Rachel filed a petition to have me declared mentally unfit. He was silent for a beat. Then tell me everything. And I did. I told him about the bank accounts, the doctor visit, the strange mail redirections, and the locked Wi-Fi. The lies soft as silk but sharp as razors. I told him how Rachel had used the guise of love to slowly tighten a noose. Arthur didn't interrupt. Not once. When I finished, he said only this. Don't sign a single paper. Don't let her see you angry. And for God's sake, Miriam, document everything. That night, I sat down at my old typewriter. I didn't trust computers anymore, not with Rachel in the house so often. So I began typing everything from memory dates, words, looks exchanged, changes to my routines. I included exact quotes when I could. I even typed up my visit to the doctor, noting Rachel's interruptions, her smile that felt like a mask stitched onto a stranger's face. And I started keeping a voice recorder with me. Nothing fancy, just an old digital Olympus I used back when I took minutes for local board meetings. I turned it on every time Rachel visited. At first, she was careful, all sugar and concern. But as the weeks passed and her petition moved forward, she got bolder. One afternoon, she burst into the house, didn't even knock. She held up a prescription bottle I'd forgotten to refill. See, Mom, this is exactly what I mean. You're slipping. I was sitting on the couch, calm. The recorder was hidden behind a cushion. I didn't argue. I just smiled. Maybe you're right, dear. Maybe I do need help. She softened, sat down beside me. That's why I'm doing all this. To protect you. And, well, to make sure things are managed properly. You know, before something gets lost. That word stuck in my mind. Because it wasn't about care. It was about claim. Rachel didn't want to save me. She wanted to replace me. That week, I called Angela Ruiz, a junior lawyer I'd mentored decades ago now, a full-fledged estate litigator with her own practice in the city. She'd always called me Mimi, and when I told her what Rachel had done, she said nothing for a moment, then quietly asked, "Do you want me to represent you, or burn her strategy to the ground?" "Why not both?" I replied. Angela came over the next day. She brought almond croissants and 3 manila folders. "This is what we need to disprove her claims," she said, sliding each one toward me. Proof of mental competency, recent evaluations, cognitive tests, references from peers. A financial timeline showing no signs of mismanagement, forgetfulness, or erratic behavior. Documentation of manipulation texts, recordings, logs. Anything showing Rachel's coercion. I handed her my typed notes and told her about the recordings. Her eyebrows lifted. "You've already done half the work," she said. "Now let's build the rest." She booked me a full cognitive exam with Dr. Elaine Norris, a neuropsychologist known for her no-nonsense reports and disdain for frivolous guardianship filings. I passed every test. Short-term, long-term abstract reasoning. I even remembered the exact name of my 4th-grade teacher and the make of my first car. "You're sharper than most 40-year-olds, I see, Doctor," Norris said, smiling as she wrote her notes. Meanwhile, Rachel kept moving forward, unaware of the trap slowly knitting itself behind her. She called the neighbors, told them I was going through things. I heard her on the porch one day whispering to Mrs. Felton that I'd started seeing things that weren't there. I opened the door mid-conversation. "Don't worry, Rachel," I said coolly. "The only thing I see clearly now is the truth." She flushed and left without saying goodbye. 2 days later, I received a court summons. The hearing was set for 3 weeks out. Angela arrived that evening with an entire strategy laid out on her iPad. "We're not just going to defend you, Miriam," she said. "We're going to dismantle her case piece by piece. Every claim she made is built on sand, and you've given me more than enough weight to turn that sand into dust." That night, as I sat at the window watching the moon hang low over the garden, I thought of Rachel as a child. Her tiny hand in mine, her laugh when I spun her in circles. The way she used to ask me to read her favorite book not once, but 4 times in a row, just to hear the rhythm of my voice. How did we go from that to this? But I couldn't afford to sink into sentiment. The battlefield had been chosen. And I had 3 weeks to polish every word, every file, every memory into a weapon of truth. Rachel thought this would be easy. She forgot who taught her how to fight in the first place. The weeks leading up to the hearing moved like molasses through glass, slow, thick, yet every shift seemed to refract something sharp. Angela visited almost daily. Her tone was professional, but there was a growing fury behind her eyes, the kind that builds when someone sees the law twisted for personal gain. "We're not just dealing with greed," she said one afternoon while reviewing a document. "We're dealing with someone who knows how to make lies look like concern." And Rachel played that role beautifully. She began rallying witnesses. A cousin from out of state who hadn't seen me in 5 years sent me a message. "Hey, hope you're okay. Rachel said you've been forgetting your medications." The librarian at our local branch told me she'd received a request from Rachel to confirm whether I'd ever gotten lost inside the building. Lost. I'd been volunteering there every Thursday morning for the last 4 years. She asked me to sign something the librarian whispered when I dropped off a donation box. But I told her I wasn't comfortable making that kind of claim. Rachel's strategy was clear now. She wasn't just building a case, she was constructing a fantasy. And she expected the court to buy it packaged in her careful tone and designer blazer. But fantasies crumble under the weight of facts. Angela helped me gather character statements not from distant relatives or hesitant acquaintances, but from people who saw me in motion every week. My pharmacist who praised my routine check-ins, my mail carrier who noticed my meticulous garden and hand-labeled envelopes, the club president at our local Rotary who chuckled. "She still remembers every name at the table before we even sit down." Rachel, meanwhile, grew impatient. She stopped coming by. Instead, she began sending emails, cold-clipped messages, asking for access to my house to inspect safety conditions, or requests for copies of my financial documents so she could review potential inconsistencies. I forwarded them all to Angela. She smiled grimly. She's digging her own grave, and will make sure the court sees every inch of it. But still it hurt. There were nights I sat on my bed holding a mug of chamomile tea, wondering what I had done to deserve this. Was I too strict? Too distant after her father died? Had I pushed her too hard in college? Or perhaps the real answer was simpler and far colder. Entitlement. Rachel had grown used to control, and when I wouldn't give it, she decided to take it. 3 days before the hearing, I received a visit. Unexpected, unwelcome. Rachel. She stood at my door dressed in soft beige and carrying a box of pastries from my favorite bakery, the one I hadn't visited since the petition was filed. "Hi, Mom," she said sweetly, holding the box like a peace offering. "I thought maybe we could talk. Clear the air before all of this gets ugly." I didn't invite her in. I simply stepped out and closed the door behind me. "We had months to talk," I replied. "You chose the courtroom." Her smile faltered. "You know, I only filed because I was scared. You've been so forgetful lately. And it's not just about money." "Stop," I said quietly. She blinked. "I've documented every word you've said, every visit you've made, every lie you've told to other people about my health and state of mind. If you're here to confess, I'll listen. If you're here to manipulate, turn around." Her hand tightened around the box. For a moment, I saw a flicker of something unfiltered frustration. Panic. Rage. She stepped back. "I hope you know what you're doing," she hissed low and quiet. I didn't flinch. "Oh, Rachel," I replied, my voice calm. "I taught you how to read a room, but you never learned how to read people." She left without another word. The night before the hearing, Angela called and walked me through the schedule. Who would speak first, what Rachel's lawyer might try to push, how to keep calm, even if the judge seemed skeptical early on. "Stay grounded," she said. "This isn't a drama, it's truth. And you've already won half the battle just by being prepared." That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I played the old jazz records my husband used to love. Stan Getz, Miles Davis. The kind of music that didn't shout it, simply filled the room with quiet authority. And as I listened, I thought about dignity. What it means to age with it. What it means to fight for it, not with fists, but with clarity. I slept that night with my case files stacked beside me, not because I needed to review them again, but because I wanted to remember This wasn't just about defending my sanity, it was about defending my story. Rachel thought the hearing would be her final move the moment she erased me with a stamp and a ruling. But I had one last chapter to write, and it would not end with silence. The morning of the hearing, I dressed with deliberate care, a navy blue wrap dress, modest heels, a silver brooch my husband gave me on our 30th anniversary. Not too flashy, not too plain. Just solid, present, unmistakably clear. Angela met me outside the courthouse. She had a calmness. I leaned on one hand, resting firmly on her binder, the other gently touching my arm. "You ready to let them hear your voice?" she asked. I gave her a quiet nod. "I've waited a long time. Courtrooms have a particular kind of air. Sterile. Dry. The kind that makes truth taste like chalk if you don't clear your throat." But I didn't need clearing. I'd prepared for this like a woman preparing for the final move in a decades-long game of chess. Rachel sat at the other side of the room. She wore a beige suit, hair swept back, lips pressed in the kind of sympathetic frown reserved for eulogies and manipulated narratives. She didn't look at me, which was smart, because one glance at my face might have broken whatever illusion she hoped to cast. The judge, a woman named Deborah Langston, read the initial filings with her glasses perched low on her nose. She had that look, measured and unreadable, the kind of judge who'd seen everything and now trusted no one by default. Rachel's lawyer stood first. "Your Honor, we're here today out of concern." My client mimicked. Rachel Sutherland believes her mother, Miriam Calhoun, is experiencing diminished cognitive ability, presenting signs of confusion and paranoia that place her financial well-being at risk. The family seeks guardianship out of love, not personal interest. Ah, yes, that word again, love. He went on to list examples: unpaid bills, disorganized correspondence, a supposed outburst at the doctor's office, none of which had actual evidence beyond Rachel's claims, and a vaguely worded letter from a family physician she'd cherry-picked. I watched Rachel nod solemnly, as if bearing a tragic burden. The performance would have impressed a theater crowd. Then Angela rose. If Rachel's lawyer was buttered toast, Angela was a steel knife on polished marble. "Your Honor," she began, "we will demonstrate that not only is Mrs. Calhoun of sound mind, but that this petition is a strategic attempt to gain financial control under the pretense of concern. We have documented manipulation, recent cognitive evaluations, and direct contradictions in the petitioner's testimony." Her voice was firm, not showy. She didn't overreach. She just let the truth tighten like a noose. And then it began. Witnesses. The first was Dr. Elaine Norris, who reviewed my test results on the record. "No signs of dementia, disorientation, or delusional thinking," she said plainly. "In fact, I'd say Ms. Calhoun demonstrates exceptional memory and verbal reasoning for her age." Then came Joseph Tran, the pharmacist. He confirmed I refilled prescriptions early, never late. That I asked thoughtful questions. That I once reminded him that his system had doubled a medication entry. Next was my friend Gloria from the book club, who beamed as she took the stand. Miriam leads our discussions. She recalls page numbers, quotes passages, and she remembers what snacks each of us likes, including my low-salt pretzels. The courtroom chuckled softly. Rachel shifted in her chair. But it wasn't until Angela played the first recording that the air changed. On the speakers came Rachel's voice, soft and syrupy. "You really shouldn't bother balancing your checkbook anymore, Mom. You're just going to mess it up. Just sign it over and I'll handle it, okay?" Then another. "You don't remember what I told you last week? See, this is exactly why the court will believe me." And then one more, the one she didn't know I recorded at all. "Look, once I have control, things will be easier for both of us. And if some of your money ends up covering things for the kids, well, you'd want that anyway, right?" Silence. The kind of silence that wraps around a lie and holds it under. Judge Langston didn't blink. She simply turned to Rachel. "Ms. Sutherland, would you like to explain these statements?" Rachel's lawyer stood to object. "Your Honor, these recordings may have been..." Sustained, the judge snapped. "But I'd still like to hear her answer." Rachel stood, but her voice was suddenly smaller. I didn't mean it like that. She's just so stubborn, and sometimes I get frustrated, but I never meant to gain control of her finances." The judge interjected. I just wanted to make sure she was protected. And by protected, you meant having full legal authority over her estate. Rachel paused. In that pause, I saw something I hadn't seen since she was a little girl, and broke my favorite vase trying to sneak cookies. Fear. Only this time, there were no crumbs to sweep under the rug. Angela stood again, calm, measured. I'd like to submit a written statement from Miss Calhoun, she said, handing the judge a folder. It outlines the changes made to her accounts without permission, the testimonies of neighbors, and her daily cognitive log spanning the last 60 days. Judge Langston flipped through the documents. Then she looked at me. Miss Calhoun, do you wish to make a statement before we recess for the day? I stood. Not because I had to, but because I wanted my voice to rise from the center of the storm. I may be old, I said, but I am not absent. I may take longer to remember things, but I never forgot what love looks like or what betrayal sounds like. I turned to Rachel then fully. You wanted to erase me with a petition, but you forgot I spent my life writing words that mattered. And today, those words spoke louder than yours. Judge Langston called for recess, but the real verdict was already echoing in the walls. I sat on the wooden bench outside the courtroom, the weight of everything still vibrating beneath my skin. Not anxiety, not even anger anymore, but something colder and more certain. Control. Angela leaned next to me, her tablet in one hand, the other steady on her lap. She wasn't one to celebrate too soon, but even she allowed herself the faintest smile. You struck a nerve, she said softly. I didn't want to hurt her, I whispered back. I just wanted her to stop. Angela nodded. Sometimes the only way to stop a lie is to walk it into the light. Inside, the judge was reviewing the recordings again. Rachel sat silently, lips drawn into a pale line, her lawyer whispering frantically beside her. I knew that look on her face. It wasn't regret. It was calculation. The kind that scurries when the plan goes off script. What she hadn't expected, what people like her never expect, is that someone like me might know how to fight back without shouting. That dignity and strategy aren't mutually exclusive. That silence doesn't mean weakness. It just means we were watching. The second half of the hearing began with Rachel's lawyer calling a new witness. A neighbor, one Mrs. Hardwick, who lived 3 doors down. A woman I hadn't spoken to in over 6 months. She mentioned to me she had trouble remembering if she'd locked her door, Mrs. Hardwick said, her voice uncertain. And one time she called me to ask what day it was. Angela stood composed. Mrs. Hardwick, are you aware that the lock on Ms. Calhoun's front door was faulty for several weeks and required jiggling the key just right? No. And did you know that the day she asked about the date was the morning after daylight savings time? Oh, no, I suppose I didn't. Angela nodded, not unkindly. Thank you. That will be all. It was a gentle dismantling, but a dismantling nonetheless. By then, Rachel was unraveling. Her fingers twisted a handkerchief in her lap. She no longer looked poised. She looked exposed. Then it was my turn. Angela asked me to take the stand, and for a moment the room shifted. All eyes on the old woman they expected to stutter, to forget, to falter. But I didn't. I began with my routine. Waking at 6:30 every morning. Breakfast. Half a grapefruit. English breakfast tea. 1 teaspoon of honey. Mondays were laundry. Tuesdays groceries. Thursdays library volunteering. Fridays I reviewed finances. Every pattern was clear, every decision deliberate. I recounted the bank visits, the pharmacy calls, the paperwork I filed for my late husband's pension. I've made a life of details, I told the court. I lived by lists, by order. I raised a daughter on structure. And yet when I refused to hand that structure over, she decided to tear it down. Angela then asked, do you believe your daughter filed this petition out of concern for your safety? I looked directly at Rachel. No. I believe she filed it out of fear that she wouldn't get what she wanted in time. That I might use the money for myself. That I might live too long. Murmurs stirred behind me. The judge raised her hand, silencing the room. Rachel's lawyer stood again. Objection, Your Honor. That's speculation. Judge Langston tilted her head. It's a statement about motive, not fact. I'll allow it. Angela smiled faintly. She knew we'd already pierced the heart of the story. And now it was time to end it. Angela submitted one final piece of evidence. A printed email one Rachel had sent to a financial advisor inquiring about the liquidation process of a retirement account tied to my estate. The date, 2 weeks before she filed the petition. There was no concern. There was only calculation. When the judge called for closing remarks, Rachel's lawyer made a last-ditch plea for caution. Even if Miss Calhoun appears capable, now he argued these cases are preventative. They're about ensuring she doesn't fall through the cracks later. Angela responded simply, "Your Honor, we don't file death certificates because someone looks tired. We wait for evidence. And every piece of evidence today proves Miriam Calhoun is not only competent, she is the most prepared person in this courtroom." The judge said she would return with her decision after a short recess. Rachel avoided my gaze as she left the courtroom. For the first time in years, she looked like a child again. Not the daughter I'd raised, but the version that couldn't control the room anymore. Angela and I sat in silence, neither of us speaking. I thought of the first time I held Rachel in my arms, how fragile she felt, how deeply I wanted to protect her. And now, all these years later, I was protecting myself from her. How do you grieve a betrayal that wears your child's face? The judge returned. We stood, and as she spoke, her voice was clear, unwavering. After reviewing the documentation, the testimony, and the submitted evidence, it is the opinion of this court that Miriam Calhoun is fully competent to manage her own affairs. The petition for guardianship is denied with prejudice. With prejudice, meaning Rachel couldn't try again, meaning it was over. There was no outburst, no gasp. Just the sound of Rachel's chair scraping back as she rose and left the room without a word. Angela leaned toward me. "We won," I exhaled. For the first time in months, I felt air reach the bottom of my lungs. But it wasn't joy I felt. It was liberation. When we stepped out into the late afternoon sun, it was golden. The kind of warm, forgiving light that falls over endings you earned the hard way. Angela placed her binder in the crook of her arm. "Would you like me to walk you to your car?" she asked gently. "No," I replied, voice steady. "But I would like to walk alone for a moment." She nodded, gave my hand a soft squeeze, and disappeared into the tide of courthouse traffic. And there I stood, a 74-year-old woman who had just defeated her own daughter in court. I thought it might feel like victory. It didn't. It felt like standing at the edge of a field after a fire. The flames were gone, but so was the color. So was the familiar shape of things. I didn't cry. Not when I reached the car. Not when I got home. Not even when I opened the fridge and saw the jar of peach jam Rachel had made me last Christmas labeled in her neat handwriting. "For Mom sweet like you." Instead, I did what I always do. I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table, and I began writing. A letter. Not for the court. Not for the lawyer. Not even for Rachel. For me. "Dear Miriam, you were never weak. You were never confused. You were never what they said you were. You remembered birthdays. You balanced every bill. You made soup from scratch and never forgot the time. They tried to reduce you to a diagnosis, but you, woman of lists and lemon bars, woman of lavender and ledgers, you remembered who you were, and that saved you." The pen ink bled just slightly where my hand trembled, but the words held. I thought of all the women I had seen over the years, wives erased by husbands, mothers drowned out by their children, grandmothers patronized into silence. Some nodded along when called confused, just to avoid the fight. Some gave in before the forms were even signed. And I realized, this story wasn't just mine. It was for them too. That evening, Rachel called. I stared at the screen for a long time. My thumb hovered over the green button. Then the red. In the end, I let it ring. No voicemail, just silence. I didn't need to hear excuses, or sorrow, or a soft voice wrapping around new lies. The court had ruled. The truth had echoed. That was enough. For the first time in weeks, I slept deeply. No recorder tucked under my pillow. No legal briefs at my bedside. Just me, a book I'd been meaning to finish, and the kind of quiet that didn't feel like loneliness but sovereignty. The next morning, I walked to the farmer's market. The woman at the honey stall smiled and handed me my usual jar without asking. "You look taller today," she said. "I suppose I am," I smiled. After that, I resumed my routine. Laundry on Monday, groceries on Tuesday, Rotary Club on Wednesday. And every Thursday, I sat at the library helping kids pick their next favorite book. Their voices bright, their questions wide open, and no one doubted I belonged there. Weeks passed. I never heard from Rachel again. But the story traveled. A neighbor asked if I might help her mother with some estate documents. She's sharp, but my brother thinks she's not. And now I'm not so sure. A young law student who clerked with Angela emailed me for advice. "How did you stay composed?" she asked. "How did you keep believing yourself?" And one morning I received a letter. Unmarked envelope. No return address. Inside was a note. "I thought taking control of your life would give me peace, but I forgot where I learned strength. You didn't deserve what I did. I'm sorry, Mom. R." There were no flowers. No grand gesture. Just ink on paper. Too little. Maybe. Too late. Probably. But still, it meant she heard me. That I hadn't vanished beneath her version of my story. And that in some small way was enough. Because the truth is, no one gets to define your mind for you. No one gets to decide you're gone while you're still speaking. And no child, no matter how lost they are, ever gets the final word if you keep holding your own. I am Miriam Calhoun. I remember everything, and I am still here. It's strange how quickly life settles after the storm. Within a month of the hearing, my world returned to its quiet rhythms. The same wooden spoon I stirred my soup with, the same hydrangeas out front, the same chair by the window where I read every morning with a blanket folded neatly over my knees. But something inside me had shifted. I had always thought of myself as someone behind the scenes. The typist, the quiet supporter, the one who arranged, prepared, made space for others to shine. But when my daughter tried to erase me under the guise of concern, I realized that silence is only noble until it becomes permission. And I would not permit my own disappearance. Angela came by one afternoon with lemon scones and news. "A reporter from a local legal journal is doing a piece on elder guardianship abuse," she said, pouring tea into one of my good cups. "She wants to feature your story." I stared at her. "A story about what?" "Me surviving my daughter's lawsuit." "No," Angela smiled. "About how you refused to disappear?" At first I said no. I didn't want pity. I didn't want attention. I certainly didn't want Rachel dragged through the papers even after everything. But Angela leaned forward, serious now. "You don't need to do this for you," she said. "Do it for the women who won't fight, who've already given up the password to their lives." And she was right. So I agreed. The article came out 3 weeks later. It was titled, "Her Daughter Called Her Incompetent. So She Took Her to Court and Won." My photo sat above the fold. Me standing in my garden holding a basket of herbs, the house behind me. They interviewed the judge anonymously. "It was one of the clearest cases I'd ever seen," she said. "The daughter thought she could out-talk the truth, but Miriam didn't need to argue. She just had evidence." I received letters, so many, from strangers, mostly women, some elderly, some not, yet all writing to say the same thing. "Thank you." I thought I was the only one. One wrote, "My son tried to have me evaluated after I refused to sell the family home. I thought maybe I was losing it, but now I know I'm not crazy, just inconvenient." Another, "I kept journals for years. Your story made me realize they're my protection, not paranoia." And from a woman named Tessa in Ohio, "They laughed when I brought up court, but now I know paper remembers what people try to forget." I began speaking at local events just once a month. A short talk at the community center, a Q&A at the library. Nothing glamorous. Just me, a lectern, and a story people hadn't realized they needed to hear. The first time I spoke, a woman raised her hand and asked, "But how do you know when it's not concern? When it's manipulation?" I thought about that for a long moment. Then I answered, "When they stop asking what you need and start telling you who you are." She nodded, and so did the rest of the room. Rachel never reached out again, not directly. But one afternoon I saw a car slow outside my house. A pale silver SUV I recognized. She didn't park. She didn't get out. She just paused for a heartbeat too long, like someone remembering how a place smelled, or how it used to feel to knock on that door. Then she drove away. I don't know what I would have done if she'd come in. Maybe I would have poured tea. Maybe I would have said nothing. Maybe we would have sat in silence, letting the years between us speak louder than words. But she didn't, and that was her choice. My choice was this: to continue, to live, to not let betrayal become the closing chapter of my life. I joined a writing group. I painted one wall of the guest room a cheerful yellow. I adopted a scruffy little dog named Clementine who barks at mailmen and snores louder than a chainsaw. And every morning I remind myself, they tried to write the ending for me, but I hold the pen now, because dignity isn't something you're granted. It's something you claim, and I did. It was a Wednesday morning when the phone rang, the landline, not the cell. Hardly anyone used that number anymore, except old friends, spam callers, and the occasional misplaced delivery man. But this time it was someone unexpected. Mrs. Calhoun. The voice on the other end said, "This is Detective Paul Linwood with the Elder Advocacy Division." I stiffened. "Yes. I'm sorry to trouble you, ma'am, but your name came up in another guardianship abuse inquiry. A neighbor of yours, Elizabeth Felton, referenced your case and suggested you might be willing to talk to us about your experience." Elizabeth. Sweet, nosy Elizabeth, who always smelled faintly of lavender and butter. I smiled despite myself. "Yes, of course," I said. "What do you need?" He asked for a meeting, nothing formal, just a conversation. I agreed. And when he arrived the next day, notebook in hand, I sat him down with fresh cinnamon tea and almond cookies from the bakery Rachel used to frequent. Funny, the memories that linger in flavors. We talked for over an hour. I walked him through the details, the recordings, the forged narrative, the court battle, the aftermath. He took notes diligently, but it wasn't until the very end that he looked me in the eye and said something that stayed with me. "Most people your age," he said gently, "don't fight back. Not because they can't, but because they think no one will believe them." I nodded. "We're taught that love excuses everything, even theft, even betrayal." He jotted that down. Before he left, he said, "Would you be willing to let us refer others to you, victims who are unsure what to do next?" I hesitated for just a breath. Then I said yes, but tell them one thing first. He raised his eyebrow. "Tell them they're not crazy. They're not old. They're not broken. They're being targeted. And there's a difference." After he left, I sat at my desk and stared at the journal I'd started after the hearing, thick with ink and memory. I flipped through the pages. There was power there, pressed between the margins. My voice preserved. And suddenly I had an idea. I picked up the phone and dialed Angela. "I want to start a group," I told her. "Nothing big. Just a gathering. Once a month. Women who've been pushed aside. Talk. Share resources. Maybe even prep them before they walk into courtrooms." Angela paused, then said, "I'll help. I'll book the room." And that's how it began. We called it Second Voice, not because we were anyone's echo, but because so many of us had been forced into silence the first time around. The first meeting was small. 4 women, 1 man, a folding table and a dented coffee urn. But what bloomed in that room wasn't pity. It was rage turned into structure. It was sorrow turned into strategy. They shared stories. My daughter moved into my house, then stopped me from seeing my own mail. My niece told the neighbors I had dementia. I was recovering from pneumonia. My son said it was just for now, that I could move into the guest house. Then he changed the locks. I listened. I offered advice when asked. But mostly I held space. Because sometimes that's what a courtroom never gives you. Space to speak before the gavel comes down. At the end of that first night, a woman named Loretta took my hand. "You made me feel like I'm not invisible," she whispered. I squeezed her hand. "You were never invisible. They just hoped you'd stop looking." Word spread. The next month we had 11 attendees. The next 23. One afternoon, a young woman showed up, early 30s, smartly dressed. She waited until everyone else had left before walking up to me. "My mother went through something similar," she said, "but she didn't make it to court. She didn't even try. She thought she'd lose." I nodded. "It's easier to hand over the pen than to write the ending yourself." "I want to help," she said. "I'm a social worker. I can screen cases, maybe build out some resources." I smiled. "You already have." Second Voice became more than a group. It became a lifeline. We created a pamphlet, built a small website, Angela helped draft a pro bono legal referral sheet. And slowly stories started changing. Not all ended in victory. Some lost their cases. Others settled. But they were seen. And for many, that was the first step toward remembering their own worth. Rachel never showed up. Not in person. Not in letters. Not even in gossip. I sometimes wondered if she felt shame. Or if she felt nothing at all. But I stopped letting those thoughts rent space in my mind. I had work to do. One spring morning, I was asked to speak at the state legal conference. Just 5 minutes, they said, about the power of documentation, of resistance, of your story. I wore the same navy wrap dress, the same silver brooch, and as I stepped up to the podium, I said, "My name is Miriam Calhoun. I am 75 years old. I was betrayed by my own blood, silenced by suspicion, and underestimated by a system that too often sees gray hair as a warning sign. But I am not weak. I am not finished. And I am not the only one." The crowd rose. I didn't cry. But for the first time, I almost did. It was early summer when I received the letter from the State Council on Elder Law, typed on thick ivory paper tucked inside a pale blue envelope. It bore the seal of the state and a line I never imagined seeing beneath my name. Recipient. Community Advocate Award for Legal Empowerment of Seniors. I stared at it for a long while, my tea going cold. I hadn't asked for recognition. In fact, most days I tried to avoid attention entirely, happy to stay in my garden running my second voice group, responding to emails from strangers who'd stumbled upon our story in that legal journal. But this felt different. This wasn't applause. This was acknowledgement. Proof that fighting back even at 75 meant something. The award ceremony was small, polite, held at a conference hall with bad coffee and gold-trimmed name tags. But I stood at that podium in front of rows of lawyers, judges, and caregivers, and told the story not of what was done to me, but what I chose to do about it. I saw eyes widen when I said I recorded my own daughter. Saw jaws tighten when I described the emotional erosion that came before the legal assault. Saw pens scribble furiously when I said, "Guardianship abuse doesn't begin in court. It begins at the kitchen table with a missing checkbook." A casual comment about memory. A locked drawer. A daughter who stops asking questions and starts making decisions. Afterward, one judge, an older man with tired eyes, approached me quietly. "My sister tried to do it to our mother," he said. "I didn't believe it. Until now." I shook his hand. It's never too late to look again. On the way home, I looked out the window of Angela's car, soft hills rolling by fields turning golden under the sun. I felt something strange stir in me. Not victory, not peace, something more rare, a quiet sense of legacy. Because for so long I'd assumed my legacy was in Rachel, her career, her children, her presence in the world. But Rachel had chosen a different path, and I had chosen not to follow her down it. Instead, I had chosen strangers, women I might never meet again, men who'd been told to just go along, neighbors whose names I only knew through letters. They were my legacy now. One Tuesday afternoon, as I was preparing for our monthly second voice session, Clementine began barking wildly at the window. She always barked at squirrels' shadows her own tail, but this bark was different. Frantic. Focused. I went to the door expecting a delivery truck. Instead, I saw Rachel, standing on the sidewalk, not at the gate, not approaching, just watching. She looked thinner, pale. The sharp lines of her suit replaced with soft denim and a cotton blouse. Her hands were shoved deep into her pockets. She didn't wave, didn't smile. I didn't move either, just held her gaze. Then slowly she turned and walked away. No words, no apology, no performance, just presence. And for the first time in a long time, I felt nothing toward her. Nuache. No rage, not even sorrow. She had become a shadow, real, but without weight. Later that night, I wrote in my journal, "She stood at the edge of my life again." But this time, she didn't try to enter it. And I didn't open the door. That's not cruelty. That's the cost of betrayal. Second Voice met that evening in the library basement. We had 30 chairs now. 3 volunteers. A waiting list. We introduced a new exercise. What would you say to the person who tried to silence you? I went first. I said, I forgive you, but I do not forget you. You made a choice. So did I. And mine was to keep living loudly. There was silence after that. Then someone clapped. Then someone else. And then the room filled with a sound I hadn't expected. Laughter. Not because it was funny, but because it was freeing. Laughter from people who'd finally said the unsayable. After everyone left, I stood at the doorway with the lights off, breathing in the quiet. I had lost a daughter, but I had gained something else. A voice I hadn't known I was still allowed to use. And I was just getting started. Autumn settled in like a sigh. The hydrangeas browned at the edges, and the light through my windows came in slower, softer. I changed out the summer curtains for heavier ones and pulled the warm throws from the cedar chest. Even Clementine seemed to understand her steps slower, her naps longer, her bark now more of a grunt when the doorbell rang. It was in this quiet season that I received the letter from Rachel's daughter, my granddaughter. Her name Eloise written in careful cursive on the envelope. I hadn't seen it in years. She was only 15 the last time we spoke, standing on my front porch behind her mother, too timid to meet my eyes. Inside the envelope was a single-page note. Dear Grandma, I found the article. The one with your picture. Mom never told me anything. She just said you were getting old and didn't want visitors. But I remember you. You made peppermint hot chocolate with tiny marshmallows. You taught me how to press flowers between pages. I know I'm not a child anymore, but I'd really like to see you. If you want, love, Eloise. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and placed it beside my teacup. My fingers trembled not from age, but from the weight of a door long shut creaking open. I waited 3 days before responding. Not out of spite, but out of care. Some doors should not be flung open. They should be tested gently, step by step. My reply was short. Dear Eloise, I would love to see you. Bring nothing but yourself and an appetite for apple tart. I'll be home Saturday at noon. Love, Grandma Miriam. I cleaned the house that Friday, like a woman possessed. Not because it was messy, it never was, but because I wanted every corner to say, you were always welcome. Saturday arrived. Right on time, so did Eloise. She was taller, her hair darker than I remembered, tucked into a long braid, but her eyes soft, searching, unsure, were the same. I opened the door slowly. She stood there, one foot slightly behind the other, as if afraid I might slam it shut. I wasn't sure you'd answer, she said. I always answer for you, I replied, and I meant it. We sat in the kitchen, the same one where I once taught her to slice apples with a paring knife too big for her tiny hand. I served the tart warm with whipped cream, and she took the first bite with reverence. After a while, she asked, Did you really take Mom to court? I paused. Yes. Was it awful? Parts of it. She looked down. I don't know what she told people, but I think she was scared. So was I admitted. Silence hung between us, heavy but not sharp. She doesn't talk about you, she finally said. Not really. Just that you stopped talking to us. I smiled gently. That's the kind of story people tell when they don't want to admit they walked away first. She looked up. Her eyes glistened. I'm sorry. You don't have anything to be sorry for. I should have written sooner. You did now. That's enough. And we spent the afternoon walking through the garden. I showed her the calendula I'd just planted. She pointed out the overgrown rosemary. We laughed about Clementine, who followed her with such devotion it made my heart ache. That night after she left, I sat by the window and wept for the first time in a long time. Not for Rachel, for what never had the chance to grow between us. But Eloise was something new, a seed unspoiled, a possibility untouched by resentment. She visited again the next week, and the one after. She brought her sketchbook, showed me her drawings, told me about college applications boys she didn't like, professors who talked too much. I listened, heart open and quiet. She never asked me to speak badly about her mother, and I never did, because my story was mine. Rachel's was hers. And Eloise, she was writing her own. One evening, as she was leaving, she turned to me and said, You know, if she ever calls you, what would you say? I thought about it, then said, Nothing probably. I'd let her speak first, and then I'd listen, just to see if it was her voice, or still the version of me she created. Eloise nodded. She's not the same, but I don't think she knows how to come back. Some people never do. Do you want her to? I didn't answer right away. Then I said, I want peace. I don't need it to come with a face. Eloise hugged me tighter than usual that night. And as I watched her walk to her car, confident, kind, and carrying no weight that didn't belong to her, I realized something. She didn't come to fix anything. She came because she wanted to remember who I really was. And in doing so, she helped me remember too. The first frost came early that year. I remember it not just because of the frostbitten dahlias I forgot to cover, but because it was the same morning I received a letter postmarked from a small town in Vermont. Inside, a card with a watercolor painting of a pine tree. No return address. But the handwriting, I knew it instantly. Rachel, dear mother, I don't know how to start this. Everything I try to write sounds either defensive or pathetic. Maybe both. I heard Eloise visited you. She hasn't said much. Only that you welcomed her. That you still make apple tart. That the house smells the same. I've thought about writing so many times. But shame is like cement. It hardens around you until you don't know where your skin ends and your guilt begins. I didn't just file that petition to take control. I filed it because I couldn't admit I didn't know how to take care of you. And because I was afraid that one day you'd be the one who left me slowly like Dad did. So instead, I tried to leave first. I don't expect forgiveness or answers. Just, I want you to know I see it now. All of it. Love. R. I read it twice. Then I folded it and placed it in my desk drawer beside my old will and a copy of my cognitive evaluation. Not because I needed to keep it as evidence, but because it was part of the story now and the story after everything still belonged to me. That afternoon I walked to the cemetery. My husband's stone stood beneath a tall maple tree that was shedding its last golden leaves. I heard from her, I whispered. The wind picked up, scattering brittle leaves at my feet. I don't know what to do with it. The silence that followed felt heavier than the cold. But then I imagined him smiling gently the way he always did when I overthought things, and I could almost hear him say, "You don't have to do anything, Mim. Just let the weight move through you." So I did. I let it move. I didn't call Rachel. I didn't write back. But I didn't throw the letter away either. Because some truths don't need a reply. They just need a witness. The next second voice meeting was the largest we'd ever hosted. 47 women. A waiting list. Someone brought hot cider. Someone else brought a microphone, which I declined. I preferred to speak with nothing between me and the room. That night, I told them a truth I hadn't said out loud before. I wasn't brave, I began. I was scared. Every day. But fear doesn't get to make decisions for me anymore. It doesn't get to decide what I forget, what I silence, or who I become. A woman in the back, quiet maybe 70 or more, raised her hand. What do we do when the person who hurt us says sorry? But we don't know how to believe them. I looked around the room, faces waiting, hearts fractured but upright, and I said, "You don't have to believe the apology. You just have to believe you deserved it." They nodded. Some cried. Some, like me, just breathed a little deeper. After everyone left, I sat alone in the empty room listening to the last echoes of voices that once trembled, but now filled spaces like music. That night at home, Eloise called. "Grandma," she said, "Mom's been different lately. She still doesn't talk much, but she's quieter, sadder, maybe softer. She sent me a letter." Eloise paused. "Will you write her back? Maybe one day. Would you want to see her?" I thought about that for a long while. Then I said, "Only if she's coming to see me, not the version of me she built to justify what she did." "That makes sense," Eloise whispered. I could hear something unspoken in her voice. Relief, maybe. That she didn't have to be the bridge, the translator, the fixer between two women too proud or too wounded to speak plainly. "Thank you for not asking me to choose," she said. "You were never meant to be in the middle," I replied. We said goodnight, and I sat by the window again. Clementine curled up at my feet, the moonlight spilling like milk across the hardwood. Somewhere out there, Rachel was writing letters, and I was writing my life, one page at a time. No revisions, just truth. The first snow arrived early in December, soft as powdered sugar. It blanketed the rose bushes and dulled the sound of passing cars. From my kitchen window, the world looked paused, as if holding its breath between the last page of one chapter and the fragile beginning of the next. That morning, I sat with a fresh pot of tea and my journal open to a blank page. I had planned to write another essay for the Second Voice newsletter, something about boundary setting or holiday guilt, but instead I just stared at the white space. Then I wrote a name. Rachel. Not as a daughter, not as a betrayer, just as a woman. I didn't write her a letter. I wrote about her, what she was like as a child, how she used to sing nonsense songs in the car, how she refused to wear mittens but always held my hand when it snowed. I wrote about her college years, how proud I was, how fiercely I defended her to anyone who doubted her ambition. I wrote about the moment I first felt the shift when she stopped needing my approval and began resenting it instead. The little barbs, the softened insults dressed as care, the distance that grew between us like ivy creeping over a brick wall. And I wrote about the court, the lie, the betrayal, the stillness. When I finished, I didn't feel closure. That's a myth we sell to ourselves. The neat bow, the clean break. What I felt was presence, the past sitting beside me, no longer haunting, just existing. A story I lived through, not one I had to keep reliving. Later that week, Eloise came by to help decorate the tree. She brought gingerbread cookies she'd baked herself, a little burnt at the edges, just like mine used to be. We sipped cocoa as we strung lights, her face glowing in the reflection of the ornaments. Mom asked if I'd give you something, she said gently. I looked at her. You don't have to. I know, she said, but I think you'll want this. She pulled a small package from her bag wrapped in brown paper tied with twine. Inside was a worn copy of Little Women, my copy. The one I used to read to Rachel every winter when she was small. The one with the dog-eared corner on the chapter she loved most. The one where Jo makes peace with who she is, even if it disappoints others. I flipped through the pages and something fell out. A note. You read this to me every winter. You said Jo was stubborn, but she always came back to the truth. I'm trying to do the same. If there's a path back to you, I'll walk it, even if it takes the rest of my life. R. I folded the note, placed it back between the pages. Eloise said nothing. She didn't need to. That night after she left, I lit the fire and sat by the tree with Clementine snoring softly beside me. I thought about what forgiveness looks like after a betrayal so complete, it tried to erase your name from your own life. It isn't a door swinging open. It's a window cracked, letting in a little light. The next morning, I placed Little Women on the shelf in my bedroom. Not on display, but within reach. The next Second Voice meeting, I stood before a full house and said, I want to tell you what forgiveness is not. Heads tilted, pens paused. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is not returning to the same terms. It is not a soft yes to someone who offered you silence or cruelty. I looked at the women and a few men gathered before me, their faces weathered by life, but etched with dignity. Forgiveness, I said, is deciding that you will not let someone else's failure become your unfinished sentence. A murmur of understanding rippled across the room. Some people earn their way back, I added, and some just earn their place in your story as a lesson, not a companion. Afterward, a woman named Janice came up to me, tears in her eyes. You said what I couldn't, she whispered. My sister tried to put me in assisted care, said it was for my own good. She didn't even visit after. And now? I asked. She sent me a Christmas card, Janice said, voice trembling. Just signed her name. No message. I placed a hand on hers. Sometimes that's not a beginning. Sometimes it's an ending. She nodded slowly. That winter, Second Voice started a podcast. We called it Still Here. Each episode featured a voice, someone who refused to be erased. I recorded the first one myself. In it, I said, they thought we were finished because we stopped shouting. But the truth is, we were sharpening. We were learning to speak with precision. We weren't gone. We were preparing. The podcast took off. Thousands of downloads in the first month. Stories poured in from places I'd never heard of: Arkansas, Dublin, Cape Town, Singapore. Some long, some barely a few sentences. But all of them echoed one thing. Thank you for reminding me that my voice still matters. And that, more than any court ruling, any award, any apology, was the justice I had longed for. To be heard, to be known, to be believed, even if it was years too late, even if it was only by strangers, even if the ones I love the most never listened at all. Because sometimes you are the one who has to listen to yourself first. And once you do, you never forget the sound again. By the time spring rolled around, I had stopped watching the mailbox for Rachel's handwriting. Not because I didn't care, but because I had reclaimed something far more valuable than reconciliation. I had reclaimed myself. Still, the next letter caught me off guard. No return address. The envelope was pale lavender, the color of the hyacinths now blooming by my garden gate. Inside, a single sheet folded carefully. Mother, I won't ask to be let in, but I wanted to tell you what I remember. You used to hum when you ironed Dad's shirts. You never missed a single parent-teacher conference. You once sewed the hem of my prom dress with trembling hands because I insisted it had to be perfect. You never forgot birthdays, never raised your voice. But you did raise me, and I failed you. I don't blame you for not writing back. You're not cruel. You're just careful. I made you careful. I don't know if I'll ever deserve to stand beside you again, but I want you to know that I'm trying. I've started volunteering at a memory care home. I'm learning how to listen again to those whose voices are softest. If you ever want me to show up, I will. Anywhere. In silence, if that's what it takes. Still your daughter. Rachel. My fingers didn't tremble as I folded the letter and slipped it into the drawer. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the hyacinths dancing in the breeze. I didn't know what I felt. Not anger. Not sadness. Maybe something close to stillness. That evening, during a long walk with Clementine, I passed a memory care center not far from my neighborhood. The front windows glowed warmly, and inside I saw a group of women playing cards. A young woman, slim hair in a bun, leaned over one of them laughing. I couldn't be sure it was Rachel, but I chose to believe it was. Not because I needed her to change, but because I needed to believe people can. That night, I began composing a letter. Not to send, just to see if I could write it. Rachel, I don't know if I'm ready, but I'm not angry anymore. And maybe that's the beginning of something softer. Eloise brings life into this house. Your echo is in her, but she doesn't carry your weight. She carries only your light. I'm grateful she found me. I hope you find yourself too. I'll be in the garden this Saturday. Noon. The gate will be open. I left it unsigned. I didn't mail it. But Saturday came. I sat on the back porch in my gardening hat, a pot of lavender waiting beside me. Clementine curled at my feet. The gate didn't creak. No footsteps approached. And yet I wasn't disappointed. Because healing isn't waiting for someone else to arrive. It's planting lavender anyway. It's knowing you can sit in your own story without shame. It's writing letters not because you need them answered, but because you finally have the words. That evening, Eloise came by hands full of warm muffins. She kissed my cheek, asked about the flower beds, and told me about her internship at the gallery downtown. We laughed. We made tea. We lived. And when she noticed the letter on my desk, the one addressed but never sealed, she looked at me with a quiet understanding. Are you going to send it? She asked. Maybe. Would it change anything? No, I smiled. But maybe that's not the point. She sat across from me and took my hand. You've changed everything just by surviving out loud. The phrase stayed with me long after she left. Surviving out loud. That's what Second Voice had become. That's what Still Here had become. That's what I had become. Not a victim, not a warning, but a voice. Firm, gentle, unmistakable. That night, I picked up my pen and wrote in my journal. It's not about whether she comes back. It's about knowing I no longer need her to. I am no longer waiting at a locked door. I'm tending my own garden, and everything I need is already blooming. Spring gave way to early summer, and the world turned lush with life. The garden thrived. The peonies exploded in pale pinks, and the rosemary, which I once thought I'd lost to frost, returned sturdier than ever. I often found Clementine sleeping beneath the lilac bush, snoring softly like the world owed her nothing but warmth. The doorbell rang one Saturday just after noon. I wasn't expecting anyone. Second Voice meetings were held on Thursdays, and Eloise was away visiting colleges. Angela had texted she'd be in court all weekend. I opened the door slowly, and there she was. Rachel. No makeup? No handbag. Just a pale green linen shirt slacks and a folded envelope in one hand. Her eyes, once sharp and knowing, now held something I'd never quite seen in her. Uncertainty. "Hello, Mom," she said, voice nearly inaudible. My body went still. Not frozen. Just still, like it was checking itself for wounds. "Are you here to speak?" I asked. "Or are you here to be heard?" She exhaled. "To be heard. Mostly." I nodded once and stepped aside. She entered like a ghost who remembered the rooms better than the people in them. Her eyes scanned the pictures on the walls, the familiar hall table, the little tray of keys. Nothing had changed. Except me. We sat in the kitchen. I poured tea without asking. I didn't want to make it easy, but I didn't want to make it cruel. She sipped quietly, her hands trembling slightly as she set the cup down. "I read the article," she said finally. "The one in the legal journal. And then the podcast." I didn't respond. I didn't know how much you carried. How much I took for granted. Still, I said nothing. Rachel looked up finally, meeting my gaze. "I thought controlling your life meant protecting you. But it wasn't about you. It was about me. My fear of being left behind." "You were never left behind," I said softly. "You walked ahead and then looked back, angry that I wasn't following." That landed. She flinched but didn't argue. "I volunteer now," she offered. "At the center near the hospital. I sit with women who don't remember their own names, but somehow still hum lullabies they sang to their kids. I write them down. I keep a notebook." I waited. And then slowly she slid the envelope across the table. Inside was her own story, typed. 9 pages. Titled, "What I Took, What I Missed, What I Now See." I didn't open it. I placed it beside my tea. "You don't have to forgive me," she said, "but I wanted to come. In person. To show you that I'm learning. That I finally see the shape of the harm I caused. And then, you once said I never learned to read people. I think I'm trying now. Really trying." I looked at her, not as a mother, not as a victim, but as a woman who had outlived the person her daughter once thought she could control. "You can't undo what you did, Rachel. But you can outgrow it." She swallowed hard. "I want to." "Then do it for yourself. Not for me." We sat in silence for a long while. The sun through the lace curtain cast soft patterns on the table. I thought about all the versions of myself I'd been since the day she filed that petition. Afraid, angry, numb, resolute, reborn. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. Unfolded it. My silver thimble. The one I used when mending clothes, long lost for years. "I found it in a box of my sewing things," she said. I don't even remember taking it. I took it from her palm and turned it gently between my fingers. "Maybe you weren't ready to stitch things back then," I said. A sad smile tugged at her mouth. I didn't tell her we were okay now. We weren't? I didn't tell her I forgave her. That's something that must happen in its own time. But I did walk her to the door. I did hug her, not tightly, not long, but real. I did watch her walk down the garden path without turning back. And when she was gone, I returned to the kitchen and placed the thimble on the window ledge beside the rosemary. A small thing, but mine again. Later, I added a new entry to my journal. She came with silence. She left with less shame. That might be enough for now. That evening, I recorded a new podcast episode. Just my voice. No guests. I said. Sometimes the apology doesn't fix the pain. Sometimes it just tells you the other person finally felt it. That's not healing. That's recognition. But even recognition can be a kind of mercy. The next morning, I found Clementine barking at the mailbox. Inside was a small package from Eloise, a hand-stitched bookmark with my initials and a note. "You stitched your life back together, Grandma. I just wanted to give you a stitch of mine in return." I pressed the bookmark to my chest and looked out the window. The hyacinths were starting to fade, but the rosemary still stood strong. The final meeting of the second Voice Spring series was held in the library auditorium, a larger space than usual, filled wall to wall with folding chairs, the scent of brewed coffee, and a quiet hum of women who no longer whispered their stories in kitchens, but stood tall in front of strangers and said, "I was erased, but I remembered myself." I stood near the back of the room that evening watching the ripple of connection as one woman spoke about her sister forging documents, another about her son who stopped calling the moment he got power of attorney. Their stories no longer shocked me, but they always moved me like a chorus of rain tapping against old windows asking to be let in. When it was my turn, I walked to the front with no notes, no script, just presence. My name is Miriam Calhoun. I began as I had at every meeting since the start. And I used to believe silence was strength, that if I just endured, things would right themselves. A few people nodded, the kind of nod that comes from deep knowing. But I've learned that silence, I continued, can become a cage. And eventually, someone will lock it behind you and claim it was for your safety. There were murmurs, now soft sounds of affirmation, of shared pain. I was betrayed, I said, by the one I brought into this world. But that's not the end of my story. I paused, because what I said next mattered most. I didn't just survive, I transformed. I went from someone whose name was being signed away to someone whose name now signs the charter of a growing national network for elder autonomy. Applause, not raucous, not pitying, just steady, earnest. When it died down, I finished with this. If they try to take your voice, speak louder. If they try to rewrite your life, pick up the pen. If they try to silence you, sing. I sat down next to Janice, who now ran one of our second voice branches in another county. She leaned over and whispered, "Do you ever think she'll come again?" I knew who she meant. Rachel. I looked at the women standing in line after the talk, waiting to tell their stories. I thought of Eloise, now writing editorials in her college paper about generational dignity. I thought of Clementine asleep in my chair at home, ears twitching even in her dreams. Then I answered, "She already did." And I left it at that, because not all returns need repetition. Some are just a final note to a song long finished. That night, I returned home to a quiet kitchen. The moon was full. I boiled water for tea, sat in the worn armchair by the window, and opened the envelope Rachel had given me weeks ago, the one I hadn't dared read yet. What I took, what I missed, what I now see. The pages were typed, but I could see the places where the keys had pressed harder. Frustration, confession, memory. She wrote about feeling invisible after Dad died, about watching me become stronger, more self-contained, and mistaking that strength for absence. She wrote about fear and guilt, and how for years she thought if she just took the wheel of my life, she could steer me safely through my old age without ever asking where I wanted to go. "You never needed saving," she wrote. "But I needed to feel like a savior, and I confused that with love." She ended it simply. "I'm not asking to be let back in. I'm just asking to not be forgotten entirely." I folded the pages and placed them in the same drawer as her earlier letter. Then I opened my journal and wrote, "Forgiveness is not a door I walk through. It is a field I stand in alone. And every now and then someone may walk into it, not to be embraced, not always, but to be seen." Miriam Calhoun never became a celebrity. She never wrote a memoir. She never spoke on national TV. But in dozens of small towns, in library basements and community halls, her story was passed around like sacred text. Second Voice grew into a national network. Her podcast, Still Here, became a cornerstone for anyone navigating betrayal in old age or reclaiming their voice after years of erasure. Eloise graduated with honors, her thesis titled "Inheritance of Silence: How We Reclaim Ourselves When Our Families Forget Us." Rachel never moved back. But every year on Miriam's birthday, a card arrived unsigned, but always in lavender ink. Miriam never needed the name. She recognized the weight of the words. On her final birthday, she sat under the blooming dogwood in her backyard, journal on her lap, Clementine resting beside her. She wrote her last line. "They tried to call me gone, but I had already arrived." Then she closed the book and let the wind carry the rest.